To date, the more socialism we have, the less charity that we have, and I think much to the detriment of the human soul. The whole idea that capitalism would be the only thing that we care about, that's insane, and that's because that doesn't actually even describe the goals, the objectives of human beings.
Professor Brooks, capitalism has been around for more than 300 years. Why has your vision on the moral capitalism never materialized? Could you please clarify why it is preferable for all people to have equity instead of decision-making power?
I wouldn't rule out the idea that people should have decision-making power. It's true, there are workplaces that have this. I belong to one. I'm a faculty member at Harvard University. I vote on things all the time. Now, I don't vote on my own salary, because that would have all kinds of practical inefficiencies and problems, and that, it would be hard, as Professor Wolff quite clearly points out. So there are cases in which this, the idea of democratizing workplaces can and should work. Why is it that, moral capitalism hasn't taken over? Well, because people are fallen and people are imperfect. It's the same reason that good socialism hasn't taken over. Socialism has been tried again and again and again. I mean, and it's not even, it's an obvious statement that the Soviet Union failed, that the People's Republic of China is ultimately going to, is failing the human rights of people and stripping people of their human dignity, that Cuba is an economic joke. I mean, these are truisms. Now, maybe the social democratic model, AKA the managed capitalism model, is the middle way that will work for a lot of places under different cultural circumstances. But the truth is that we're looking for something better, and we have to strive for it. The progress that we're trying to make has to keep in mind that neither Richard's vision nor mine is ever really going to come to pass in an unmitigated way without problems. These are projects that we're all working on such that we can create a better life for more people. What do I want? I want a society that actually does better and gets closer to this goal. I realize that sometimes it's going to succeed and sometimes it's not going to succeed. And if Richard is correct and gets his way, sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it isn't. We have to get away from this Manichaean thinking about our goal-making process in the economic systems, or democratic or social systems, or theologies for that matter. I mean, Manichaeanism was an actual religion that said that it's going to be all black and all white. It's going to be all good or all bad. On the contrary, let's set our sails in a particular direction and do the best that we can. And we're going to have setbacks, and let's keep fighting for this better future together. Because, by the way, that journey, that progress per se is a great moral good. The whole idea that capitalism would be the only thing that we care about, that's insane. And that's because that doesn't actually even describe the goals, the objectives of human beings. I mean, the idea that what I care about most is personally making profit or making money, the kind of rank materialism. That's, my specialization as a social scientist is the science of happiness. That's what I teach here at Harvard. And let me tell you, you want to become unhappy? Be a materialist. It's the single fastest way that you can be miserable about your life. So the key is, how do we set up a system such that people can express these tendencies with the greatest freedom and enjoy their work, and to have a sense of fraternity inside their work, to enjoy the relationships they get in their work? And the answer is a relatively free and unfettered labor market existing in a capitalist system, and in which people have opportunities to lift themselves up, in which there are pathways in which they can earn their success. And so my answer to how can we make things better inside the United States, and not just better in the developing world, is that we actually need to return to these ideas of self-improvement in the opportunity society, to create more human capital, to make people more valuable. Look, 70% of people say right now that their best friends are people they know at work. 70% of Americans say that. The United States has a higher rate of job satisfaction than virtually any of the European countries, including the social democracies. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not deluded. There might be some sort of false consciousness, but I don't think so. The problem is that not enough people have access to this kind of opportunity. Not enough people have access to this. And when you ask people, as I've done with my friends at the Gallup polling organization, why is it that you enjoy your job? The answer is never because I make money. Richard's right. It's because I actually have my friendships there, because it makes me happy to be around these people, because I'm able to, in essence, serve others and earn my success. And that's what we need to be going for. That's how we can solve this problem. And that actually is no small part of how we can create more community. Richard and I are not that far apart. I'll add that attitudes about economic redistribution and collectivism are one of the greatest predictors of private charitable giving. People who say they want the government to do more to redistribute income, that they want a more socialist system in the United States, they're the least likely to give charitably, to give their time charitably, to give their money charitably, to give their blood charitably. These are just facts that we actually see in the data. Now, part of that can be because of the odor, but I dare say that, there shouldn't be too much odor about blood donations. There shouldn't be that much odor about, volunteering to clean up a park, and to volunteer inside a society. And yet the idea of collectivism, it tends to do something, it seems. And, from my point of view as a behavioralist, I would say that it does something to motivation. It does something to the human spirit. It takes away the sense of agency from people as problem solvers. One of the studies that I've done a lot of work on as a researcher over the years is the happiness that actually comes from charitable behavior, which I find is the best single thing that you can do. Is my column in the Atlantic this very morning was, this is how you can buy happiness, is by helping somebody else with your money. Give away your money. The trouble is that if you reduce the idea of transfers of money only to the sort of the desiccated technocratic machine of government redressing differences that people have in their lives, you make people into cogs in that machine. And this is, of course, one of the long-standing criticisms that people have had of socialism and its inability to describe the human experience. It tends to strip people of this humanity, of voluntary help that they have of each other, of the agency that comes from indeed being your brother's keeper. I think that we don't have to make that decision. I don't think that necessarily that perhaps Richard's suggestions for a new socialist system would not create that set of incentives. But to date, the more socialism we have, the less charity that we have, and I think much to the detriment of the human soul. Deng Xiaoping is the reason for the alleviation of poverty of between 600 and 800 million Chinese, with the openness that actually came starting in southern China in 1982. So that's the reference that we're seeing there. The IT revolution, of course, is fundamentally democratizing and flattening the entire planet. Manufacturing of hard goods and localized services makes it a lot harder to be a truly globalized economy. But that in which we can connect to anybody, any place in the world relatively costlessly, and we have services that are not geographically bounded and are really hard to define, means that anybody can participate in the new entrepreneurial economy in a very big way. And so what that's doing, of course, is lifting up whole parts of the world. It's not just China, it's also India, which is responsible for 350 million of the people who've been pulled out of starvation level poverty since the late 1970s in that case, since the worst grips of Nehruvian socialism under the circumstances, which was really a predation. What we find is that people all over the world, and by the way, probably one of the next great revolutions, which I cheer on, is going to be the growing prosperity of communities all over Africa, which will be participating in this part of the economy. So I think that the IT revolution, which has a lot of problems to it, it's a technocratic revolution that's creating all sorts of cultural problems around the world. We don't have to rehearse that. That's a different debate. And I strongly suspect Richard and I see that in just the same way. But we do have to recognize that it's also an incredibly democratizing economic phenomenon that's going to reward ingenuity in a world that does not require natural resources, in a world that does not require transportation, in a world that does not require physical capital like plants and equipment. And I think that that's going to speed up the development process in places all over the world to the great benefit of the poor. I'd make a comment about the idea that there's a nuanced cost-benefit analysis about the Soviet Union and China. I have a lot stronger opinion about that. China during the communist times is a direct result of economic and authoritarian government policies. 50 million of their own citizens perished. In the Soviet Union, 30 million of their own citizens perished, largely having to do with repression, starvation, labor camp deaths, gulags, the complete suppression of human rights. I think it's something that we can all agree to unilaterally regret. Now, let's get into what we would think of today as the things that we're worried about. We're quite correctly worried about environmental degradation and the policies that we have in the United States. There is no example of environmental degradation that comes even close to what happened during Soviet times in the USSR, or to China today, where there are 1 million dead pigs floating down the Yellow River, where you actually will see an entire mountain disappear under central planning policy. These are things that are unthinkable to us, even by modern standards. So I would say that it's not a nuanced cost-benefit analysis. It would be, of course, inaccurate, because anybody who tells you that anything is all benefits and no costs, or all costs and no benefits, is lying to you. But the costs of these systems are just the human cost, the environmental cost, the cost in human rights, the cost in dignity are so vast that I think we should all regret them in a very big way. Second, both of those regimes, the USSR and the PRC, started on the arguments that were pretty close to Richard's arguments about trying to run countries and companies like families. The idea that the profit motive is not necessarily is something that we have to look out for, that we can get beyond the idea, that we can run things like a community and as a commune, and that we can count on people not being selfish. I think that I wish it were true. I mean, I certainly ran a socialist organization called My Family, where it was from each according to his ability, except for my teenage kids who did not perform up to their abilities, and to each according to his needs. But the truth is, it doesn't scale. That's the problem. I wish it did. I really wish it did. It doesn't scale up. And the result is that we keep promising this. We keep being promised this, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work, and it doesn't work again. And so what we're left with is basic market systems where we shave off the worst parts, the things that we don't like, where we try to solve the market failures. And it's not perfect, but it's better, and I think that we can continue to do better. To begin with, you talked about capitalism as almost a monolithic economic system and a variety of socialisms. That's an important construction, because it's true that there isn't one socialism. And it's true that we're unsophisticated in the way that we understand socialism in this country. You presented 3 models: the failed Soviet model, the at least somewhat successful social democratic model, judged as such by the citizens of social democratic countries, and then a new model, which is largely theoretical, that you described. With largely, it's an ownership or worker-based, more democratic, workforce oriented model. But I would like to suggest that capitalism is not monolithic, that there are multiple capitalisms as well. And the reason is because socialism and capitalism exist on a spectrum. And so, for example, I can give you 3 different capitalisms. There's managed capitalism, which is another way of talking about social democracy. Labor markets are much freer in Denmark than they are in the United States. Denmark is always held up as the sine qua non of social democratic excellence. And yet people can be hired and fired much more easily in Copenhagen than they can in California. They're just guaranteed a $26 an hour minimum wage, last time I checked. This results in lots of nice things, and as they say, as Ira Gershwin once wrote, nice work if you can get it. But it also leads to a number of problems in markets. For example, that immigrants to Denmark, for example, Arabic-speaking immigrants who are not fluent in Danish, given the fact that almost all labor markets are conducted in Danish, have something like a 73% unemployment rate because they simply cannot earn enough to merit a $26 minimum wage, in which case they are on the welfare benefits that you quite appropriately decried as that which strips people of their dignity. So social democracies, aka managed capitalism, don't do so well on that count. Another kind of capitalism is authoritarian capitalism, which is what we see in the People's Republic of China. You're quite correct that this is not the same kind of communist nor capitalist economic system, and yet is responsible for pulling not the majority, but a minority, a plurality of the souls out of poverty since 1970, specifically since 1982 with the opening of southern China. the People's Republic of China have pulled approximately 700 million people out of $1 a day poverty, adjusted for inflation, obviously, starvation level poverty. Here's the problem with that. Here, I mean, let's celebrate that to begin with. That's a wonderful thing. I think we all agree that that's great. But you and I, Professor Wolff, we also agree that there are significant problems with the Chinese system: repression, oppression, the idea of slave labor, which still exists. I mean, it's just the treatment of Tibet, the threatening of Taiwan, the way that people are treated who disagree with the government. Why is that? And the answer is because when I talked about the 5 forces that have pulled people out of poverty, I mentioned globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and the culture of entrepreneurship. The People's Republic of China has tried to make this shift without property rights and rule of law, without the institutions of democracy. They got as far as they could with a desperately poor population. Once desperately poor population and a growing middle class, but they're stuck in a middle income trap precisely because they haven't taken on the other parts. This is not an indictment of the 5 institutions. It's an incomplete case. And then, of course, there's corporate capitalism or cronyistic capitalism, which we see in Argentina, places all over South America and many places in the world, which stains the idea of free enterprise system, stains the idea that the free enterprise system can be a cultural instantiation of the freedom of the human spirit, of an entrepreneurial culture, because it really is the privilege taking away from the people at the margins. High Gini coefficients of extreme inequality that exist precisely because of the lack of true merit, of true freedom of institutions that actually treat people in the same. Are we perfect in the United States? Absolutely not. I believe we're moving more and more toward the Argentine crony capitalist system. That's the reason I talked about the philosophical changes, the cultural changes, and the policy changes that could improve our capitalist system. Now, for your criticisms about capitalism, number 1, about inequality. I'll remind us again, inequality has fallen worldwide for 35 years, and consumption inequality in the United States has stayed flat. And consumption inequality is as important as income inequality, I dare say. The inequality case that is to be made, that leveled against capitalism, I think that it's more complicated than that. And I think the data don't support the full-on attack of capitalism. I think that we, the people who believe in free enterprise, have made an inadequate case along these lines, but I'm trying to make it now. Second is the instability of capitalism. When I look at the social democratic regimes, and of late, I see the same kind of business cycle instability. I see social democracies suffered in recessions. Arguably the worst case was Iceland in the financial crisis. You could say because they fell victim to the vicissitudes of capitalism from the West. But you have to admit, I think that we all have to admit, that the Scandinavian economies, the best exemplars of social democracy, suffered a lot, certainly as much as the United States. And before that, there were recessions and depressions and famines all across the socialist or communist systems, which I realize you don't support particularly. But it's worth pointing out that the 50 million people who've died in the People's Republic of China is largely because under communism, under Maoism, there were famines that came from the business cycle or the agricultural cycle. And finally, authority. I want more authority pushed down. I agree with you, but I don't think socialism is the way to do that. I agree that it's not always fair. It feels unjust, the authority that certain citizens have over other citizens in a private sector context. But I'm a lot more worried about the arbitrary exercise of authority of governments over individuals. That when Jamie Dimon doesn't like a particular employee, he can fire that employee from JP Morgan Chase. When the means of production are owned by the government, that's a person who crosses the government can be put in jail, can be put to death. That's a kind of authority, a kind of power with which I'm even less comfortable. And certainly that is not a hyperbolic case looking back at what happened in the Soviet Union when unemployment was literally illegal. People went to jail because they were unemployed. That's a true exercise in raw power. And I think that we could probably all agree to regret that power over our human brothers and sisters. Can we democratize the system? Can we get the things that you want? I believe that we actually can. But once again, My bottom line is that we need to expand ownership. We need to expand free enterprise. We need to expand entrepreneurship, not contract it.